Welcome. This is your coach Joe Lucas, and welcome to this very and special e-learning series, How to Overcome Adversity. Have you ever wondered how certain people, no matter what goes on in their world, in the face of adversity, uncertain odds, just terrible things happen, they find a way to rise to the occasion. And yet there's other people who, basically something, small happens to them and it takes them all out of sync. It really takes them out of their plan, out of their rhythm. So what we're going to do in this multi-part e-learning series is discover what the differences are between people that really can, in essence, overcome adversity, right? Find a way to push through, and others who allow it to wilt them and to really just take them off track. Now, where this information comes from, a couple different areas. Number one, my own study of human success and human dynamics for the past 25 years, coaching financial advisors for nearly 20 years, my personal observations about myself, working with other clients throughout the years, through the tech bubble of 2000, 2001, 2008, 2009, and then obviously some personal challenges that all of us face, living life, from our own illnesses to the illnesses of loved ones to the death of loved ones. So there's a lot of things that go on. And so my point to you is this. It's never a question of whether or not you're going to have adversity. In fact, I'm not going to do e-learning on how to avoid adversity, because you can't. The only way you avoid adversity if you literally live under a rock your entire life. And let's face it, that's not what we do here. So in this e-learning, what I'm going to do is share with you some little strategies that I find, and by the way, that we all can adapt. So here's the key thing. There's nothing in this e-learning series that is what I call genetically coded. So in other words, it's all can be learned. It doesn't mean that just because in the past you haven't handled adversity well, it does not mean that you cannot handle it going forward. So I want to be very clear on that. And by the way, if you don't have that belief, let's adopt it. There's always a new way of dealing with things. So let's get started. Now, like I said earlier, we're all going to face adversity. And what we find is the average person, when they get adversity, it really kind of takes them off key. Now, when I say adversity, and we'll talk a little bit about this down the road. It could be something as little as traffic in the morning, to a flat tire, to interruptions in the day, right? To one of our top clients leaving to go to one of our competitors. Or it could be something major as, a heart attack or the illness or death of a loved one. So, there's a whole gambit here. But here's the bottom line. How you deal with it will greatly determine your level of success. And here's what I mean. When you face adversity and you allow it to totally consume you, and you in essence shut down, you go into reaction mode. You stop driving the things that are important to you. And so in other words, the average person wilts. They get extremely reactive. Not only do they get reactive, but their internal dialogue changes from saying to themselves, what has to happen in order for me to overcome this and move forward, to, why does this always happen to me? Or why did this happen? Or what does this mean? Or, you don't control your dialogue. So an average person, without any kind of mental training, that's what we're going to do in this e-learning, if you're not aware of strategies, it's very easy to just overreact and really get off pace. What we find is successful people rise to the challenge. When you look at and that's why I love reading biographies, because in every biography, and I don't care who you like, whether it's a political figure, a sports figure, a business figure, leader, whatever it is, whatever you're into, right? I almost will guarantee you 100% of the time, you are not going to read a wonderful story about how this person was born with a silver spoon in their mouth and everything just came to them effortlessly, and there's never any setbacks, and they just went on to be wildly successful, like with no challenges. I've probably read over a couple hundred biographies over the past 15, 20 years. I've yet to find a story that did not include some adversity. Because let's face it, a biography is about a human being living their life. And if we're living our lives, we're going to have adversity. So what we find is successful people, and like I said, you can look at any walk of life, it doesn't matter. You can look at a sports figure who has a traumatic, who has a devastating injury, to a business leader who has a big setback. They're resilient. And resiliency is one of the key elements of overcoming adversity. Because when you're resilient, when you're in a resilient way, you're also what we call in a resourceful way. And when you don't control your internal dialogue, so when you freak out, so to speak, you lose control of your dialogue. When you lose control of your internal dialogue, you lose control of your resourcefulness. So that's why it's so important to make sure you decide in advance to how you're going to handle adversity. Now, what I'm not saying, though, is to think negative. So this is not like, hey, get up in the morning as part of your morning ritual, ask yourself this question. Hey, I wonder what bad things are going to happen to me today. That's not what I'm saying here. Expect the best, prepare for the best, but also make sure you have a plan B. Because, every once in a while, and think about this in your own lives, every once in a while we have what we call the perfect day, right? We get up, we feel great. We execute our morning ritual. We get into the office, we're feeling good. We execute our daily game plan. We get win after win after win. We just like everything we touch turns to gold. Everything is wonderful, right? That happens once out of every 10, 20 days. Typical day is what? There's going to be some adversity throughout that day. Hopefully little, but it's there at some level. So you're never going to have an adversity-free world or an adversity-free day. Okay? Now, let's also talk about some other things. Like I said, always expect the unexpected. I've always said, again, adversity is certain, and hopefully it's not large, but decide in advance how you're going to handle it. One of the beliefs I have, and I got this from Tony Robbins, was there's always a way if you're committed. There's always a way. So no matter what happens to me, no matter what goes on in my life, large, little, there's always a way to overcome it if I'm committed to it. There's always a way. I don't believe no means no. I don't believe that one door closes and it's closed forever. I believe there's always an opportunity. There's always a way to overcome it. Okay? So my first belief is, again, adversity is going to be part of the world, what we do. And the second thing, let's plan for advance. So let's establish a game plan. And when we talk about establishing a game plan, I talk about, again, we have ABCD here, but decide in advance how you're going to handle it. So, for example, I'll give you a good example. Let's say, for example, a client calls and you had a meeting with this person, right? And they cancel. And so you had a 90-minute block. And now you're like, oh my God, this person canceled, what that means. So you get all freaked out, right? Versus, hey, let's go to plan B, which is I have a list of projects, I have a list of calls, I have a list of things to do. Let's go ahead and get things done. All right? Very, very important. The other thing is when you have adversity, no matter what it is, the first thing you want to do is sit down and ask yourself a couple questions. What does this mean to me? What has to happen for me to overcome it? Or what has to happen in order for me to manage it? Now, what I want to do throughout this series, I'm going to share with you some stories of clients. Now, I'm going to change their names, or I may not use any names, quite frankly, to protect anonymity and confidentiality. But I'll share this with you. Some of my best clients that I've had for years. If I tell you the stories of divorces and moving and deaths of loved ones and just all this stuff and betrayal, and yet they're some of the most resilient people and some of the most successful people I know. But if you were to look at their life and say, well, let's kind of do a quick biography, you say, oh my God, how does this person make it through the day? Yet they're highly successful and well adjusted. And yet another person, could call me up out of the blue and say, oh, so-and-so called and they filed a complaint. I said, when did this happen? Oh, last week. I said, what you been up to? Nothing. Took them totally out of their game. And I want you to think of it this way, and I don't like stock charts. It's not what we do here, but I want you to visualization for a second, okay? Think of it this way. Your business, your life is like hopefully a nice smooth chart going up, right? We get better every day. We get more experience every day. We get more successful every day. Every once in a while there's dips. I guess in our world we'll call it a correction, right? Here's my question. How deep of a correction do you want? See, by training yourself and by building awareness of how to handle adversity in advance, those corrections are short and shallow. If you don't have a strategy to handle it, and then go what we call unconscious, right? We just kind of freak out. It could look, well, in some cases, it could look like the fall of 2008, right? In the spring of 2009. That's not a pretty chart. A lot of trauma in there. So I want you to have that visualization as you're thinking about your life, saying, well, you know what? We're going to face adversity, so let's keep them short and shallow, right? Let's control what happens there. And I think that, to me, is really the key thing, moving that forward. Let's talk about some roadblocks. Okay, so what are your beliefs? So when you get adversity, and look, like I said, it could be a little adversity. It could be traffic in the morning, a flat tire, maybe a disagreement with your significant other, whatever it is. What are your thoughts? Do you all freak out? I mean, because remember, human beings are creatures of habit. So you have a pattern you run. When you kind of get uncomfortable, when you face some adversity, you run certain patterns. And what you've got to realize is, hey, what are they? So what I want you to do. And if you want to pause this for a second, that's cool. But here's a question I want to ask you. I want you to think back to the last significant piece of adversity that you had. Now, maybe it was yesterday, maybe it was last week, last month, last quarter, whenever it is. And when I say significant, I'm not really looking for like the death of a loved one or a spouse or anything. I'm not looking for something that big. Something that you would typically face maybe in a typical day, a typical week, typical month, okay? And then I want you to think about it. And then I want you to, again, pause this, and I want you to relive that for a second. And what I want you to do is I want you to think about, what were you feeling? What were you thinking? In other words, what was your internal dialogue? How'd that look to you? All right? That, to me, is so critically important that we understand that. What is your internal dialogue? So go ahead, pause this now. I want you to relive it. Take 3-5 minutes, not more than that. And then I want you to come back. All right, welcome back. Now, hopefully you've uncovered sort of what your unconscious patterns are, your internal dialogue. Like for example, some people, when I've talking about adversity, and when somebody says, I've had this, oh my God, when I get a call on an open call, or a platinum partner calls me and they just had something happen, I say, well, before we get into all this, hey, tell me what you're thinking. And they'll say, I say, more importantly, tell me what you're saying to yourself. How come this always happens to me? What could I have done different? It's not fair. All this stuff. And so what we need to recognize is, we're going to run those patterns. One of the key beliefs, as I said earlier, you need to have is there's a way to handle adversity. Hey, look, there are plenty. So here's the good news. Ready? You've already handled adversity in the past. Now, you may have not handled as well as you wanted to, but you're still here. So guess what? You didn't throw in the towel. You didn't quit, which is a good thing. But the bottom line is you've got to determine how you're going to handle it. And so when I said a few moments ago about my belief, hey, there's always a way if you're committed. That's my belief around adversity. It's going to show up. Hey, I remember, and I'll share with you some stories, probably in the next module. I mean, my spring of 2009, with my client base, with the markets, with the economy, with everything going on, I really had a Y in the road. I probably, as a professional, faced the biggest adversity. We talk about the depths, the intensity. That was probably the most intense as a professional I felt in almost 20 years. And I taught a lot. It taught me a lot about myself and how to handle things. All right? So I want you to remember that. Now, the other piece is about perspective. Now, I want you to think about this. Think back to something that happened to you maybe 5 or 10 years ago. A piece of adversity, right? And I will almost guarantee you, at that time, you literally felt your world was coming to an end. It was falling apart. It was being shredded apart. Oh, man, I don't know how I'm going to survive this. Hey, you may go back to even as far as almost a year or two ago, right? The fall of 2008, the spring of 2009. Hey, I'm sure for some of you felt like, oh my God, the world's coming to the end. The economy's coming to the end. My career's coming to an end. Our industry's coming to an end. Right? All that uncertainty. But yet here we are. So isn't it interesting how as time goes on, it becomes less intense. It becomes less focused, if you will. The one thing you want to do is remember to keep things in perspective. Don't make a mountain out of a molehill. So, for example, traffic, flat tire, coming in late, client cancellation, you lose a client, all those things. Hey, those are events that take place throughout our career, throughout our lives, but are they really devastating? They're minor inconveniences. And see, that's the term I give it. When something like that, some people get. Here's a great example. People, and think about this yourself. You get stuck in traffic. Now I hate traffic. All right. And when I lived in New Jersey, I mean, that's kind of it's a birthright to have traffic when you live there. But what's interesting is that I decided after getting I used to get so freaked out, so frustrated, just so angry. In other words, I couldn't control my state. I couldn't control my internal dialogue. And then you get that intensity. What I decided to do is instead of getting all freaked out, I said, well, isn't this a minor inconvenience? Or isn't that a shame? Or that's too bad. And when you control your dialogue, like for example, we all have this, right? Clients come, clients go. Years ago, when I used to part company with a client, either because I wanted to or it was just time or whatever, right? I mean, it used to really bother me. It used to really, I used to get upset by it. I looked at it as a little bit of adversity. Today I look at it, it's like time. It's time, and I move on, and literally, I forget about within an hour. I keep it very shallow. The other thing you want to do is take a step back and really look at it objectively. So what does this really mean? So the first question I ask myself is, hey, what does this mean to me in the big picture? And the key word is in the big picture. Because what it means to me right now is I'm aggravated, right? Or I'm frustrated, or I'm freaked out. But when you say, what does this mean to me in the big picture? Oh, it's a little bump in the road. Something we got to deal with, right? The other thing is about inventory. And again, and I call it contrasting, okay? So for example, if I were to say to you, hey, you're going to lose your top 10 clients tomorrow. Your top 10, not just one of them, I mean all top 10. Now, what are you going to do? What does that mean to you? Most of you would sit there and go automatically in freak zone and say, oh my God, my revenue will be down 50%, blah, 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 And I agree. So, yeah, there's going to be some negative consequences to that. But let me ask you a question. Are they going to take you out back and shoot you? Are you going to live under a tree somewhere? Are you going to be deported? Are you going to have to move to a remote island? Are you going to go to prison? Well, hopefully not, right? Yes, you may have to cut back on some things, and yes, you may have to not go out to dinner as much, and yes, you may have some short-term economic uncertainty, but it's not your life, right? I mean, here's a question I'd ask you. Would you rather lose your top 10 clients or have your house burned down with your family in it? Contrast, right? Think about it. So when we get all wound up on the business side of our world, hey, it's important. It's not the most important thing. See, contrast is your friend. Contrast puts things in perspective. It's a tool. It's a tool that I use. All right. Like for example, I'll go back to 2008, 2009 when I had that Y in the road for myself. I said, what's the worst thing that could possibly happen? I said, well, all my clients go away. I quit. Have to sell the house. Get rid of the BMWs, right? And we downsize, and maybe we move to Costa Rica or Panama, and maybe I do something else. Still gonna have my health. Still gonna have my family. Still gonna have people that love me, right? Still gonna be a good person. Still gonna have a lot of my life left. And you know what? Once you kind of think through it that way, it's a very calming experience. All of a sudden, the intensity of the uncertainty, the fear, right? All that goes away. And you're just in a better place. And when you're in a better place, here's what really happens. You become resourceful again. And when you become resourceful again, you now could start figuring things out. So, when I asked myself those questions, and I remember it was a Monday morning. Because I didn't sleep, because I was so stressed out, freaked out, burnt out, all the above. And I said, okay, what does this mean? What's the worst case scenario? And I talked myself through it. And luckily for me, it was one of those. I had a couple days off, right? So I got up that morning and I said, okay, so worst case scenario, I lose all my clients, I quit, whatever. Here's what we're gonna do. Once I came to that conclusion, my brain kicked back on, right? The resourceful part of it, anyway. And it's okay. So instead of doing that, which we could do, by the way, we can just can the whole thing. Well, what would happen if we just started with a blank sheet of paper? And how would you want to reinvent yourself? How would you want to do things differently? And really, for those of you watching, I hope if you haven't, I encourage you to do so. Advisor 2015 and iAdvisor came from my most intense period of adversity as a professional in 20 years. Those programs, that philosophy, was born out of sheer frustration, out of absolute need. So that's my evidence to you about the power of contrast, the power of internal dialogue, and the power of getting resourceful again. All of a sudden, what I thought was the thing that was going to kill me, right? And what's the old saying? If it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. Going through that process in 2008, 2009, and all that adversity, that gave birth to a whole new philosophy that is really, for myself personally, and for a lot of my clients and for some people in the industry, as we're getting it out there, we're going to get the word out there to everybody that we have a superior way, a sustainable way of living a life and doing business. So, thank you for listening to module number 1. I'll see you in module number 2 for some additional strategies on how to overcome adversity.